Duke Nukem 3D is a first-person shooter by Apogee. Released under their 3D Realms brand in 1996, Duke Nukem makes his transition from a kid-friendly 2D side-scroller to a 3D environment with adult content. The game runs under Ken Silverman's build engine. Taking place after the end of Duke Nukem 2, he returns to Earth only to be shot down over Los Angeles. As it turns out, an alien race had already begun their invasion of Earth. The gameplay is the same straightforward formula for first-person shooters at the time. Pick up weapons and kill enemies, pick up keys and unlock doors, throw the switch at the end of the level, and move on. This formula may get repetitive, but the varied interactive environments keep things interesting. This includes hotels, banks, movie theaters, refineries, restaurants, space stations, and moon bases. Very few games at the time had these realistic locations. The levels of Duke Nukem 3D were designed to be non-linear through the use of ventilation shafts, destructible walls, and rooftop access with a jetpack. And it's not just the ability to fly that's been added to this game. The inventory system from the previous games was revamped. Rather than a collection of passive items and upgrades, you can select and use most items at will. Night vision goggles help you see enemies in darker areas, scuba gear allows you to stay underwater for longer periods of time, and steroids give you a huge boost in movement speed and a really strong kick attack. The inventory system is easy to use and easy to configure. Some of the weapons do have interesting effects that separate it from other games. The shrink ray makes enemies pint-sized. Although it does no damage to them by itself, you just step on them and they make a nice squishing sound. The freeze thrower does a lot of damage to enemies and their projectiles bounce off the walls and floors. Just when they're about to die, they freeze solid and a boot to the face shatters them into several pieces. Throw in a pistol, shotgun, chain gun cannon, and RPG, and you have an alien ass-kicking arsenal that anyone can appreciate. Of course, that doesn't mean the aliens will just sit there and take it. You got the pig cops who are mutated LAPD officers with shotguns. Get it? Pigs? Yeah, you do. Then there's the assault commanders that fly around and fire rockets at you, and Octobrains with deadly psychic powers. Everything in the bestiary does offer its own challenges to the player. This game introduces toilet humor into the series. Some alien troopers can be found taking a dump in the bathrooms throughout the game. Some of them even do it in the middle of the room while they're shooting at you. And if your health is low, taking a leak will restore 10 health. How that works? Don't ask. The graphics are nothing much by itself. 256 colors and lots of pixelation. What makes it stand out though is the amount of detail saturating the environments, which adds to the realism of the locations. Posters, neon signs, statues, beer bottles, trash cans, chairs, graffiti, hot babes. Yes, I did mention hot babes. Part of the story is that the aliens are abducting women, so you'll run across many of them in cocoons. Though in one level, the Red Light District, you can pay up and get them to show off the goods. Pixelated nudie goodness. Alright. One of the more peculiar sights you'll see stems from the use of the Quick Kick ability, which allows you to kick an enemy without switching weapons. If you switch to the Mighty Boot, you can kick with both feet while moving at full speed. What a sight. And the sound effects? By itself, they're average, but the game does allow for better use of the sound. Echo effects in some tunnels adds to the realism, and sound is played at a lower pitch when underwater. The voice acting from Duke, however, does steal the show in the sound department.
Nobody steals our chicks and lives.
The game makes several references to popular games and movies at the time.
That's one doomed space marine.
They come in the form of Easter eggs and quotes which poke fun at franchises such as Star Wars, Terminator, Aliens, and especially the Evil Dead trilogy.
Hail to the king, baby!
Many of Duke's quotes originate from the Evil Dead movies, and even the cover art is a parody of the cover art for Army of Darkness. Of course, the developers also threw in their own little hidden messages, like this one made by the level lord. Finding these hidden messages and Easter eggs is one of the things that made Duke Nukem 3D such a great game. Like many games with a high level of violence, Duke Nukem 3D ups the ante with its sexual content. Naturally, the game received a lot of criticism. Some countries like Germany and Brazil banned the game outright. Australia refused classification until Apogee released a version with a permanent parental lock, only to release a patch on their website to revert the game to its original state. Some of its critics alleged the game promotes the objectification and murder of women. Media Watch made the following comments on the game. Duke Nukem 3D moves the shooter through pornography stores, where Duke can use XXX sex posters for target practice. In the game, bonus points are awarded for the murder of these mostly prostituted and partially nude women. Duke Nukem 3D had no scoring system to speak of, and killing women never rewarded the player. Instead, the player was punished in the form of monsters spawning. And why would you use sex posters for target practice when you're supposed to be shooting aliens who are trying to kill you? Either these groups never seem to do their research, or the more likely reason, they're trying to spread fear and hatred amongst the uninformed. Why they would do that is an entirely different topic altogether. A fourth episode was later added to the game by upgrading it to the Atomic Edition, either standalone or with the Plutonium Pack upgrade. This adds new enemies and a new weapon, the Expander. The levels themselves have their own theme, giving obvious nods to Mission Impossible and the fast food industry.
This tape will self-destruct in 1 second.
There have been many Duke Nukem games released since Duke Nukem 3D, though these are entirely new games altogether. I'll just talk about the ports. Duke Nukem 64 is, of course, the Nintendo 64 version. The levels are played sequentially as opposed to separate episodes, and many of the drug and sex references were removed. The strip club in the second level was replaced with a shipping dock, and the steroids was renamed Vitamin X. The game does add new weapons and ammo types, and 4-player split-screen action, so it does offer something different from the original. The Sega Saturn version ran under the Slave Driver engine instead of the Build engine. That doesn't say much since it had many of its large environments scaled down because of the console's limited memory. It did include a couple exclusive things, such as a bonus level and a minigame called Death Tank Zwei. The PlayStation version was the most accurate port at the time. It contained the original 3 episodes, rearranged soundtracks and original music, plus an exclusive episode with new enemies. However, it does have frame rate issues. The game had multiplayer support, but you required a TV, console, and a copy of the game for each player. There was no split-screen support. Each of these ports naturally had their own limitations one way or another, though if you want the most faithful port of the game, go ahead and get the Xbox Live Arcade version. It has everything from the Atomic Edition and more. Multiplayer over Xbox Live, and a rewind feature which functions like a real-time autosave feature. Duke Nukem 3D also had decently powerful modding capabilities. Although much of the game is hard-coded and only included a level and art editor, you can change some things by modifying the con files. These contain the behaviors of all the items and monsters in the game. You can change a weapon's damage, the max health and ammunition, what each item gives you, an enemy's health, or you can go deeper and change the enemies into something new. It's because of these capabilities that Duke Nukem 3D had tons of mods for it. Back in the day, the larger mods were referred to as total conversions. One of them I want to show off is one of my favorites. This is called Platoon. Based on the Vietnam War, this total conversion pretty much gives you an entirely new game. You have Vietnam-era weapons, which include M16s, Laws, and Claymore mines. You can call in airstrikes to thin out the ranks of the Viet Cong, and it did a very good job for its time to replicate the theater of war. Though because of the game's limitations, the M16 had 12-round magazines, and hand grenades used a remote detonator. These seemed really awkward, but it was hard-coded into the game, and I'm impressed that they worked around it. There are tons of add-ons for Duke Nukem 3D, both commercially authorized add-ons and free of charge user-generated content. Apogee even released the beta version, which they appropriately named Lame Duke. It's more about satisfying curiosity than for entertainment value, so don't expect things to, you know, work. The shareware version was the first episode with 6 levels, and half of the weapons available to you. I did not find the free content sufficient enough to properly try out the game, but you can still mod the game to a limited degree through the con files. Deathmatch in Duke Nukem 3D was referred to as Duke Match. Multiplayer supported 4 players on the shareware version, and 8 players for the full version. I found that the pistol is surprisingly effective at long range, while the shotgun and RPG are best used in close quarters. The firing delay on the shrink ray and the throwing mechanics of the pipe bombs make them less ideal to use, but the trip bomb is much more effective in Duke Match than in single player. Every single player level had Duke Match only weapon and item spawns, and some levels gave you teleporters only accessible in Duke Match to make them less linear. But the problem that I see with most of these levels is that many areas were initially closed. You do have all the keys to unlock the doors, but access to some switches is limited, and in a lot of cases, you can't open them from the other side. Duke Match was really fun, but the level design was not refined for it. There's also a co-op mode available if you just want to beat the game with some of your friends. Multiplayer is nice and all, but back in the 90s, you could only play against other people on a LAN or through paid services such as Ken and Kali, making these multiplayer features extremely inaccessible to most people. This all changed when 3D Realms released the source code for Duke Nukem 3D. With the release of the source code from games by id Software, PC gamers wanted the same thing from 3D Realms. They got their wish in 2003. Several ports of the game were made for modern operating systems and took advantage of OpenGL to render the game in a true 3D environment. The port shown here is called eDuke32 and is running the high resolution pack. As the name implies, you can crank up the resolution to experience the amazing graphics it offers. It features widescreen support, 3D models, improved network code, and awesome particle and pixel shader effects. But whether you play Duke Nukem 3D through a source port or in a DOS environment, Duke Nukem is just a classic badass. I highly recommend this game because it has everything. Solid gameplay, powerful weapons, witty one-liners, lovely ladies, lots of mods, multiplayer, multiple source ports, political controversy, a kick-ass theme song, and a sequel that will make history. Announced in 1997, Duke Nukem Forever, also known as Duke Nukem 4, was the intended sequel for Duke Nukem 3D. After multiple delays and over a decade of development, the rights to the Duke Nukem franchise were eventually sold to Gearbox Software, who has been working on the game since 2009. The most notorious vaporware in the video game industry will finally be released! Before that happens, check out Duke Nukem 3D if you haven't already done so.